And today we get to see kings being kings, doing their thing and generally making some pretty bad decisions, as they often did. But before we get into that, I want to remind you today, let's be in prayer for Gertrude Rollins. So there's so much going on in this chapter. Just like a lot of these chapters, there's lots of action, okay? Different little stories going on. I say we get to see kings being kings and making bad decisions. And yet I think that one of the main themes that we see in this chapter and throughout most of these chapters is that God is still in control. You know, if I was someone like Elijah and I lived during this time and I was trying my best to seek God and to serve God, I would be probably stressed out all the time and concerned and worried about the state of things and the people who were in charge and the bad decisions they were making and how they were leading our nation further and further away from God. But, you know, Elijah, he doesn't seem to be worried. We really see, I think, his confidence in the Lord because he knows God is in control and God has a plan and God is working. And I think we see that here. Certainly see God's control on display here. It starts out with the story of the woman and the son that Elijah had predicted and then who he had brought back to life for her. And he ends up sending them away because of this famine that is going to be over Israel for 7 years, which is pretty nice of God to warn them about that. And so they go away, and when they come back, we see the providence of God even further because there's a problem that she's been gone for 7 years, and when her and her son return, they're going to need to be able to get their land back and all the stuff that they left. Well, they go to see the king, and it turns out he's being told a story about them as they walk in. That's the providence of God, obviously. And so God provides for this lady and her son and her family in an incredible way. And he shows his mercy to them, even in the face of a 7-year famine, of property problems and things that maybe they looked at and they didn't even know that God handled those kinds of problems. But he does, obviously, and he took care of them. The next story is a little bit disturbing. It's Elijah, and he has this encounter with the king of Aram, Ben-Hadad, who it tells us is sick. And so he sends Hazael to Elijah to find out, hey, am I going to get better from this sickness? Or is this it for me? And Elijah tells Hazael that, well, the king is going to get better, and yet he's still going to die. And he tells Hazael, I know what you're going to do. I know that you're going to be king next, and you're going to be a terrible king, and you're going to do lots of awful things to Israel. Some pretty disturbing stuff. And what does Hazael do with this information? He goes back, knowing that the king, Ben-Hadad, is not going to die from his illness. He's going to get better. And so he takes matters into his own hands. You know what? When I read that, as disturbing as it is, and you know, as frustrating and scary as it is for Elisha to have someone like that become king of Aram and know what he's going to do, and still we see God's in control. It wasn't a surprise to God. God knew what was going to happen before it even happened. Then we look at the king. We go over to Judah here. Jehoshaphat was king, a good king of Judah, but now we see his son Jehoram is going to take over in his place, and then Jehoram's son Ahaziah is going to take over. And we see with both of these kings that they walk in wickedness. And the thing that stands out to me about this is that it still goes back to King Ahab. Ahab, who did so much evil, the king of Israel. Now the bad decisions that he made, the corruption that he brought to Israel is beginning to bleed down in even to Judah, because these kings marry his daughters. And so they end up getting corrupted themselves, and now the kings of Judah are walking in a way that is displeasing to the Lord. I think the thing that stood out to me the most about this chapter is, again, just the providence of the Lord. And with that in mind, I wanted to read to you another verse. It's Romans chapter 8. Starting at verse 28, it says, "And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. For God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to become like his Son, so that his Son would be firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And having chosen them, he called them to come to him. And having called them, he gave them right standing with himself. And having given them right standing, he gave them his glory." You know what? No matter what happens today, no matter what negative circumstance we find ourselves in, or no matter what we read in the news or what we see on the internet or anything that might cause us to get a little bit more depressed today, it doesn't change the fact that God is in control. And the scripture says that he's using everything. I mean, that could be a hard verse for us to take by faith. I mean, everything. But God is in complete control, and there's nothing that can derail his plan. The plan that he has for you and me. If you are a follower of Christ, if you're a child of God, nothing that happens today is going to change what he's doing and his ultimate goal for you, to be with him for all of eternity, to share in his righteousness. And so I think that it's good for us to meditate on the providence of God, the authority of God, and let our hope and our peace rest in him today. So I'm thankful for these passages we're reading out of Kings, even though it can be depressing to read about how these people really made so many bad decisions and turned away from God, especially the leaders of the country. It was the people who were suffering underneath of them, the people, and some of the people who were trying to seek God, but the kings were not. God was still in control, and his plan was not going to be overthrown. So I pray that is an encouragement to you today, and something for us to meditate on.